Hey, it's Matt, your average gamer, and this is day 8 of a build a day until they announce DLC. That's right, we're doing a build every day until they announce DLC. We're going to see how far we can go with this, and for this one, we're going to be doing the Blade of Calling with Blade of Gold. It's a pretty awesome weapon. We're going to highlight it here. We're going to show a full build, stats at 150. Everything you'll need to know to do a lot of damage with this, and this is a really fun one. Obviously, it's very similar to the Black Knife. We're going to talk about and go over the differences between the two as we go throughout this, and since they both have similar stats, you can actually use both kind of interchangeably as well, since they scale mainly with Faith on the Ash of War, and the weapon itself we're not using too much of. We're going to highlight the Ash of War, and since it's pure holy damage, all of the Deathrite birds in the game, every single one of them, takes massive damage from this weapon art. So that's a big bonus there if you have a hard time with the Deathrite birds. Now, where do you get the Blade of Calling? You get the Blade of Calling in this little offshoot area by the elevator in the Forbidden Lands. I'll show it on the map. Many of you will be familiar with the elevator in this area because you naturally have to progress through this area, but you do not have to go in this little alcove in the elevator. As soon as you jump off here, it's just simply sitting in an office, and I'll show on the map where it is here. Very, very easy to grab as you're heading towards the Forbidden Lands. Now, let's test it out on some bosses. First and foremost, we're taking on Commander Niall here, who is a little bit difficult, but if you have anything ranged, it always works better against him. And then the amount of damage we're getting with it, with the buffs and setup we have, is actually quite good. We're able to get rid of these knights very quickly, and then once it's one-on-one against Niall, anything ranged is always going to be at an advantage with this guy. I've said that before because I've used Black Flame and whatnot on him in the past. If you're using something at a range, he just has a very limited amount of attacks, and what will happen is he'll start to repeat a lot of the same ones, like the jump attack, that's very easy to avoid and has a very forgiving dodge window. And keep in mind, this is Journey 14 on this character, so obviously it's New Game Plus 7 scaling, and the damage is still pretty good. This is definitely in the mid-tier as far as weapons go, but we're going to show you some more uses that this has, the range it has. I mean, the biggest drawback is the fact that it is holy damage, and holy damage in Eldenring is very resisted. It's the most resisted type in the entire game. That's really the #1 drawback. As far as the weapon art and the power of it goes, though, it's actually quite powerful, and it includes a fair bit of knockback that we're going to show for regular enemies. It probably has some use in PvP as well, because unlike the Black Knife, the knockback on this is very, very good for regular enemies or enemies in general with low poise. And the range on it, much like the Black Knife, is also quite good. As I mentioned, biggest drawback is holy damage. As far as the weapon art itself, it's a lot of fun, and it is viable for the majority of bosses in Eldenring, aside from the ones that have super holy resistance, like the final boss and Malekith and a couple of those ones. As far as everybody else goes, though, they're going to take fairly decent amount of damage from this, and it's a fairly safe weapon art to use at a distance as well, and this setup gets a lot of damage out of it. And right here, we're going to highlight that knockback. That knockback is something that you're going to see here, even on these dogs, which obviously have a pretty decent amount of HP. But that aside, the damage is good, and you're going to see the amount of knockback that the weapon art has, which is a really big bonus compared to the Black Knife. There's a big difference there. As you can see, even with a big target like that, he gets knocked back with every single hit. You can actually knock some enemies off horses. Regular enemies get knocked down all the time. And then NPC invaders, I'm going to show you shortly here, also will get knocked down by this weapon art. So that's definitely something to keep in mind when you're thinking about different weapons. The unique knockback this has on lower poise type enemies, even some of the bigger regular enemies and stuff, the larger ones, they just take this ridiculous knockback that the Black Knife doesn't really have. And if you want to, I'm going to show you later on, I think, in the video, but either way, as far as enemies go, you can always use the Black Knife for that debuff and that percentage damage first, and then switch back to the Blade of Calling for massive holy damage. If you're going for a holy type build, this weapon art is pretty fantastic for that. I mean, obviously, it's pure holy damage, scales very, very, very well with Faith on the weapon art, and Deathrite Bird disappeared again because that's how good this thing is against them. It's fantastic. The Blade of Calling absolutely destroys them. And as far as NPC invaders, you're going to see here that knockback. It's pretty real. It's pretty awesome, and you're able to knock them down if you hit it. They can avoid it, obviously, like anybody can. And in PvP, if you're playing against real players, obviously, it's going to be decently easy for them to avoid some of this stuff. But if you do get that hit in, the fact that you get knocked down by it, seemingly regardless of poise, that just the ridiculous amount of it, the amount of knockback is awesome. It's a huge benefit to the weapon, and it kind of makes it stand out a little bit from the Black Knife. And I think that's one of the things where it was the biggest selling point on this weapon. I managed to have a really good time going around taking on field bosses and taking on regular enemies with it because of that ability. And for the fact that aside from holy damage being so resisted, the damage itself with the right setup, and we're going to go over all that stuff soon, is just high damage. It's a really good weapon art at a distance that does a pretty good amount of damage, and it could be buffed to do a lot. I mean, it could do a couple thousand damage per weapon art, and sometimes that's even through resistances. Even if they have 20 or 40% holy resistance, it still seems to hit for decent amounts. It's just not going to hit the final boss, Radagon and Elden Beast and Malekith, because they have 80% holy resistance. It's not going to hit them that hard. It's actually not going to be that viable against them. But for the majority of bosses in Elden Ring, this is something that will definitely work, much like the Black Knife works. They're both good, and they both have different uses. By the way, if you're not subbed and you love overpowered PvE builds or just Elden Ring content in general, definitely hit that subscribe button, because this channel has been growing a ton lately, and we're going to continue to try to do a build a day until they announce DLC. I'm going to try my best at it, make as many fun builds as I can, and show off the versatility of Elden Ring, which has to be one of the most versatile games I've ever played. It really is truly amazing how many builds you can create in this game. And that dragon's going to go down soon because he doesn't have anything too resistant-wise as far as holy damage, so not too much concern there. And we're going to go over buff, stats, equipment, build, everything you'll need to know. So as we jump down here, the buffs I'm using here are very, very simple. I'm using Golden Vow, and then since we have High Faith, I'm going for Howl Shabriri for that 25% generic damage boost that's going to basically boost the weapon art. That'll boost any type of damage, so it's 40% in total between the two. Obviously, drink your tier first that has the holy tier in it, and then we get to use that fantastic weapon art in Blade of Gold. So for stats and equipment, we have the Black Knife, we have the Blade of Calling, of course, the Erdtree Seal because we're using Pure Faith and it scales best with that. We have the Shard of Alexander, Ritual Swords Talisman, Sacred Scorpion Charm, Dragoncrest. I know it's not the Great Shield. It's kind of a running joke on this character at this point. And then the Holy Tier as well. And it really ended up working out well. This was a fantastic build setup for this weapon. I think we got the most out of it. Now for a 150 stats, if you're looking at the stats here, your main thing is going to be Faith because the weapon art scales really well with Faith. If you're going to use it as a regular weapon where you want to build up successive attacks or stuff like that, you're going to want more dex because that's the physical damage part of it. But mainly speaking for this video, as you can tell, we kind of turn this into a weapon art type thing, as I do with a lot of my videos because weapon arts are by far the coolest, and that's going to scale pretty much purely with your Faith stats. So high Faith is a necessity. And that is day 8 of our build a day until they announce DLC. We're going to see how far we can go with this. We've created a whole bunch of fun builds already. There's a whole bunch more to come. If there's any builds you want to see, put them in the comments below and I'll look into it. I have a list kind of written down to keep quality up and whatnot. So if there's something you want to see, definitely comment below and I'll look into it. Maybe I can turn it into a cool build. If you're not subbed, definitely sub to this channel if you love overpowered PvE builds. There's a ton of awesome builds on my channel. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I'll catch you guys there.